Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Indian diplomacy and Indian heft around the world has been seen to increase in the past few months, especially since the Ukraine war began. We can see India standing up for what it believes in, and that is just not possible by saying so, because we've seen a lot of examples around us within our neighborhood who keep talking but are not able to achieve what they want to do. India, on the other hand, has been able to actually achieve what its interests were till now, and I think in the future as well we will be able to handle the situation pretty well. To analyze what has changed and how have we arrived to this particular stature, I have with me Lieutenant General Gautam Moorthy, who's going to take us through the story of Indian diplomacy and how is the heft actually picked up to a place where we can see India calling the shots on a lot of things around the world. Sir, thank you so much for joining me. I think this is a proud discussion for every Indian, and it'll be interesting one to find out your views.
Thank you, Aadi. Thank you very much. Jai Hind to you and your viewers. And I'm a little, I'm wondering a bit as to how come you've chosen a Fauji to discuss diplomacy and India's diplomacy. But anyway, thank you for having me here. And yes, we are following it closely, all the Faujis in my group, especially current and strategic affairs, the CASA forum. And yes, I hope I should be able to answer your questions and satisfy your viewers to some extent.
Well, sir, to answer your question, my logic was that military is a big part of diplomacy. In a country cannot have a smart and a strong diplomacy until unless its military supports it. And of course, there are a lot of other factors that go into that entire thing. And one thing that I've realized that a clear line of thought can be, demanded, if I may use that word, from a military personnel so that we can understand what exactly is happening. And that's my view. And that's what we want to do here. Thank you for that question, sir. But it's interesting. So, to begin with, in the history of independent India, this is the first time as an Indian now. I've been around for a long time since the Cold War ended and a whole lot of things happened. The word Indian, the phrase Indian interests was something that we hadn't heard before. It's something new which is coming out in the terminologies when you're discussing India. What does this signify to you?
Good question, Adi. You see, India historically has always taken a holistic and consistent view, right from the days that we became a republic when Jawaharlal Nehru was our prime minister. You know how he pushed for India being non-aligned. It was in India's interest then, he believed, and the whole government believed that we should remain non-aligned. And India was not so strong politically or economically, yet we took an independent line. There is a discernible continuum in our foreign policies from those days through the times of Indira Gandhi and now to Prime Minister Modi. We have always been a considered view in our parlance in the context of the ever-evolving world order. India has always stood by its own national interest. Our present foreign policy replicates our ideas from the non-aligned movement. And in many ways, we could say that we are witness to NAM 2.0, perhaps I would say 2.0 on steroids. Let's look around us. Every country is looking at their own interests. Even Japan and Germany have moved away from the pacifist stand that they had adopted post-World War II. They were forced to adopt. Even during the Cold War, they were quite neutral. But today, you see, and during the Cold War, you know how Germany was. It was split into two countries, East and West Germany. Today, every country is looking out for itself. And it is only natural that India takes its place in rightfully and expresses her interests and doesn't seem to be kowtowing to any group or any other interest other than her own.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody will have an countering argument to something like that that you've put across. But if you look at it from the Western angle, sir, unexpectedly, India actually took its own stand. And by the reactions that were coming out from the West, one didn't really see that they fathomed India would do something like that. Because of the closer relation or building up of relations with India and the West, I think they perceived a different reaction, especially with regards Ukraine. Uh, do you agree with the factor that the West was not ready for a position taken by India?
You see, deep down, I think the West understood what India was doing. Uh, any diplomat worth his salt in the West should have asked himself or herself the question is why should India worsen its relationship in Russia just to please us? Assume we do it, okay. We do worsen our relationship with Russia. Won't it embolden the West to extract further concessions from us, thereby causing our relationship with Russia to be ruined forever? Earlier, if you recollect, about a month ago, there were rumors of Germany not going to extend an invitation to India for the G7 summit. This succeeded in heightening apprehensions that the US-led West is pressurizing India through fair means and fouls to take a pro-West stand. Some of our own commentators were saying so. Actually, what this in effect has resulted in is that it has actually improved India's stature in the eyes of the world by this firm stance of ours. Even Imran Khan, as you know, was praising India's stand. Many African nations, South American nations are praising India's stand. Yes, that we are taking a principled stand, and the principled stand is while we abhor war, and we have said very clearly that disputes cannot be solved by this manner, we are not condemning Russia outright because we understand where Russia comes from and why it did what it had to do.
And that's the story I think we've been putting across very clearly to everybody, which is, to a large extent being accepted on the face of it, apart from the few, as you said, pressure tactics that have been applied within the entire game, sir. But sir, having said that, Delhi itself has been the center of diplomacy. I don't see any other capital in the world, probably apart from Brussels, which is a headquarter for a nation, for a group of nations,
So,
who's had so many heads of state coming in, or very, very senior people within the ladders of their own country coming into India for various things. And we now have the Prime Minister going in for a Nordic summit and the visit to France and coming back. We've seen so much interaction that I will not be able to list it out even. How does that
indeed,
fit into this entire thing?
indeed. India has truly emerged as a major player on the international scene, thanks to a very strong government. Since 2014, we've been strong. The earlier coalition was not so strong, and people have seen we are a robust democracy. The number of elections that have taken place between 2014 and today, I mean, one can lose count. And it is not always that the government at the party at the center is winning all these elections, not necessarily. So people are seeing that India is a robust democracy, a resilient economy. Despite the pandemic, we have stood up militarily to China. What more does a government or what more does a country need to do to prove itself that, yes, we are strong and we can stand up on our own? Also, do not forget our vaccine outreach has earned us sincere and outspoken respect, which was perhaps grudgingly given to us earlier. But later on, you've seen how even the US was not able to cope so well. And our vaccine outreach program has reached to all corners of the South Pacific, of all the oceans, the various islands. It's reached Africa, it's reached South America. And let us also admit that we have in Dr. S. Jaishankar a very seasoned diplomat with a deep understanding of geostrategy and geoeconomics as our EAM, who's not only articulating India's position very well, but also calling out Western hypocrisy, as and when he's needled about it, about India's stance from journalists. Your viewers will recollect his classic tongue-in-cheek retort to a question as to why India continues to buy Russian oil, and I quote, Our total purchases for the month will be less than what Europe does in an afternoon. So he had Western journalists in the room squirming, and India drawing plaudits from even the opposition parties were praising him for the statement that he made. So we have a practitioner who understands geopolitics like nobody else, and arguably the best external affairs minister that we've had. He's under the guidance of a prime minister. They're both in sync and they're both working so well. That is why you have all these countries, their foreign ministers coming here, and it's become the center of diplomacy.
Apart from an opportunity, sir, this also has some dangers attached to it with regards to performance, delivery. How do you see that, sir?
You're right. You see, now, India, this question is an important one because, now India has taken such a stand that it's very difficult for India to backtrack from here. We have to continue maintaining the stand, which is not going to be easy as the conflict gets prolonged. Today, it's in its 70th day, or perhaps more than that. And it is continuing to occupy the front pages. Every day you hear something. Mariupol is being bombed as we speak, with the last bit of resistance, including the whole lot of civilians also trapped in the underground tunnels over there, and of the Azovstal steel plant. This war is going on. Russia is showing how they're test firing missiles in this. We really do not know how this is going to pan out. But if the rest of Europe gets drawn in, then you're actually looking at World War III. It's very serious, and how India continues to maintain its stance is not going to be easy. But fortunately for us, geography has come into play, and we are at quite some distance away from the battlefields of Europe.
Hope so, sir. Nowadays, war spreads like, COVID, if I may. Talking about COVID, sir, one thing that you also mentioned, and I'd like to just emphasize on that a little more and take your opinion on it. One is that we saw the Indian, I won't call it might, I'll call it way of doing work and the reach, soft power reach, actually increasing multifold with the handling of the COVID crisis. Of course, in the second wave, we took a beating, which country didn't, and there were mistakes made. That's fine. It's part of the game at the end of it. Having said that, I find that particular period was kind of a turning point where the world started saying, yeah, here's a so-called a third world country able to figure it out on its own and do whatever it needed to do, and its people are kind of pretty much following what it's saying. Do you think that was like the biggest turning point in our recent games?
Adi, I think you have asked a very pertinent question. To my mind, the COVID crisis showed everyone how vulnerable each country was in dealing with the spread of the pandemic and to arrest it. Millions were affected. Hospital and medical services were stretched to a hill. And economies of all countries took a bad hit. I mean, everybody looks up to the US saying it's a superpower, but the US was one of the worst hit countries. India too made some initial mistakes. I'm not a diplomat. You've asked me this question, and I'll be as frank as I can. But then India understood the enormity of the problem and adopted a whole of government approach to tackle it.
Exactly.
A number of empowered committees were made. Our vaccines, in fact, were almost first of the block today. And today, India has an enviable record of having vaccinated 190 crores of its population. That's 190 followed by 7 zeros. That's the number of vaccines we have administered. Also, India, as I mentioned earlier, exported vaccines to a number of countries, thereby gaining a lot of goodwill. And what is even more important that you've drawn my attention to is that during the lockdown, while all of us were locked in and our food being delivered at home and groceries and everything else, and wondering when we'll get out of it, The government worked overtime. A number of major policy changes were made to boost Atmanirbharta or Make in India initiative of the government. We're already seeing the downstream effects of some of these initiatives, with more to follow as the months go by. I'm not saying there were no problems. You have alluded to it. The migrant crisis during the first wave was humongous and was terrible. And then the health and the oxygen crisis during the second wave. We let our guard down. But then we quickly learned, got back, and today we are performing well. And during the first wave, when all of us were locked down and everybody was looking inwards, the Chinese stealthily moved across the line of actual control and occupied our territory, which has resulted in massive troop buildup and standoff.
Yeah.
But then what has it shown the world? It's shown the world that if there's any country that can stand up to China and hold on to a crisis, feel the effects of a pandemic, feel the effects of the downturn of an economy and handle all this, it is actually remarkable if you just step back and observe it. There is no other country in the world that has faced threats on all three fronts: the economic front, the health front, and the military front. And India has handled all three, I must say, with aplomb, and has made a name for itself. That's why you find leaders making a beeline to New Delhi.
The reason for my question is actually, so we know all these incidents, and I don't think we are discussing anything really new. But when you put them all together, and that's what we are doing here,
yes,
it creates a totally different picture. And that's the kind of thought I want to probably start up with this particular discussion that we're having, is because the story just didn't start by Dr. Jaishankar going out and, speaking
yes,
strongly to a journalist, but it started with a lot of heft and with a lot of work back at home. You mentioned China, sir, and that's very interesting to me. We've always taken a very soft stance towards China, minus the past 3 months, if I may say so. There was whatever reason that we had for those soft stances. We had our trade and this and that and everything. Now, in the past 3 months, we see very pointed name, which was one of the criticisms about the establishment of India. I won't call it the government, because the government may change, but the establishment or the setup actually just continues. The name calling was not there. We never called out China. Past 3 months, we've seen the army chief calling out China. We've seen the Air Force chief calling out China. We've seen the naval, chief giving up a statement. Defense minister, the prime minister's not given a statement, but EM Jaishankar has gone ahead and spoken about it. So, and that in combination with Wang Yi's visit, sir, how do you analyze the diplomacy with India and China now?
You see, we've got to look at it not just between India and China, but overall. What has the Russian invasion done actually? It has distracted the Americans. Although it pushes US to focus on Europe, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and Australia want the focus to remain on the Indo-Pacific, and so do we. The invasion actually leaves China in a complicated predicament. So I won't worry too much about where India stands, but let's look at where China stands. Russia is nowhere close to winning the war. And in fact, as you've seen, it shifted the goalpost from what it had grandly claimed, laid down for itself, of course, what was deduced by others, but never openly articulated by Russia, which was mainly to effect a regime change and have a control over Kyiv. The Ukrainian resistance caught them by surprise. Hence, whichever way this war ends, it would lead to a considerable weakened Russia. Now, where does China come in now? China would then, to my mind, enlist a weak Russia as a junior partner, or try to buttress Russia, even though such support risks opposing its major trade partners, which is the US and the EU. Please take your mind back to the Winter Olympic Games held in Beijing in February 22. Putin was there for the opening ceremony. And on the opening day of the Winter Olympics, these two countries, under the two strongest autocrats in the world, declared a no-limits partnership, backing each other over standoffs on Ukraine and Taiwan. and a promise to collaborate more against the West. You know what the treaty reads? I'll quote: friendship between the two states has no limits and no forbidden areas of cooperation. Look at that joint statement, the timing also. Look at the timing, it was so highly symbolic. Because at this games, the United States and other Western nations had subjected China to a diplomatic boycott. So what were they doing announcing their determination to stand together? They're ready to withstand sanctions, and above all, they're ready to contest American leadership. So where does it leave India? Frankly, this puts India between a rock and a hard place. While we and China have managed, as you very rightly said, to paper over our differences over many years, the last couple of months have shown an open confrontation. At the same time, India has had a legacy relationship with Russia. Although sentiments have little place in international relations, India finds it difficult to forget the support that Russia had given us during the time of our crisis. You know, Aadi, everyone says that Russia is one of India's largest defense suppliers. Let us say for a moment, what if Russia were not an arms supplier to India? Would it change India's stance? Are we doing it only because of Russia is exporting arms to us and we are dependent upon it? I don't think that is the right conclusion to draw.
That's a Western conclusion, if I may say so. We've never mentioned.
Yeah, we've not mentioned it. You see, but the balancing game that between Russia and the West, India is trying to do is difficult. And there is a fear in India, as well as amongst the countries that I mentioned, that if there's a prolonged confrontation that takes on between the West and Russia, the Indo-Pacific will get deprioritized. And it'll make it more difficult for India to manage China's ambitions. But China has also learned a very useful lesson. When they see Russia getting bogged down, because Russia unilaterally attacked Ukraine, there was no provocation per se other than saying that we are seeing you getting closer to the West. So if you recollect, some of the commentators were mentioning when China occupied our territory in Ladakh, saying that China is doing so because of India moving closer to the West. China now realizes that not only did India stand up, but India can give China a bloody nose if required. So what I'm saying, amidst all these pressures, India will have to stand up and chart its own path. Simple as that.
It's a tough path, so that you're putting out, and of course, with two nuclear-armed neighbors, one who's probably in a bit of a doldrum, and the other who's trying to lock his own people. In a desperate scenario, jokes apart, China is in a very desperate position right now. So it's a bit dangerous, as a matter of fact. And with the world actually moving on towards a lot of tensions between pre-existing enemies, that's something which comes out pretty hard. Sir, thank you so much. I think very well articulated. You've brought stuff out in a very simple way, and that's something that as I said in the middle of the discussion as well, most of the things that we've spoken about are known to people, but you have to put all these things together in a single package for you to understand why is it happening. And as you also brought out, COVID was one of the times where I think the switch flipped on and people started realizing what the Indian game was and how India is actually doing stuff. And we've seen a flurry of activity within India. And I hope for all the pride that we have, we are able to deliver and we're able to do what is required for us to do, sir. Thank you so much. Till next time for another subject, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much. Jai Hind to you and your viewers. All the very best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.